Hey guys, tonight we're crawling out of a straw-filled sack in the cold, damp dark of a medieval morning, where the air smells like something died, but more specifically, like a lot of something's died a long, long time ago. You're a tanner now, and no, this isn't the fun kind of tanning you do at the beach with a drink in your hand and SPF 50. This is the kind where you scrape raw flesh off dead animals and soak their hides in urine. Sound glamorous? You probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before sunrise, not because you're ambitious, but because you physically cannot stay asleep in a one-room hovel that smells like a compost bin, had a baby with a slaughterhouse. There's a pig rooting around near your foot. No, not a dream, just the family pig that lives indoors to keep warm. You can hear your neighbor coughing up something that sounds like soup, and the roof drips rain directly onto your back. Ah, the luxury of medieval poverty. There's no such thing as a snooze button. The moment your eyes open, your nose hits the stink wall. A permanent bouquet of blood, ash, rotting meat, and is that horse pee? Of course it is. You're a tanner. Every day smells like a punishment. You swing your legs off the bed, actually more of a wooden slab, with a few itchy blankets, and immediately regret it. The floor is stone cold and damp. You shiver as you dress. Coarse wool shirt, stiff trousers crusted with yesterday's job, and the same boots you've been wearing for 3 years. You don't even bother washing your face. What's the point? You'll be elbow deep in hide slime within the hour. Breakfast? If you're lucky, it's a stale hunk of rye bread and a weak beer. Not because you're trying to be edgy, but because water will probably kill you. You chew with a numb mouth the way you do every morning. Same routine, same ache in your back. Same existential whisper that maybe, just maybe, you should have learned how to read. Out the door you go, stepping into streets that haven't met a broom since the last coronation. You pass the baker's boy, who makes a dramatic show of holding his nose and calling you Lord Filthbottom. Classic. People have been roasting tanners since tanners were invented. You try to ignore him, but the little goblin's got a point. You smell like something the devil coughed up. By the time you reach the tannery, the sun's barely up. The sky is that sad, foggy gray that looks like it gave up halfway through being a color. The building is on the edge of town because, historically speaking, no one wants to live anywhere near you. Even in medieval times, with open sewers and plague rats, you were the one that smelled too bad. You open the workshop gate and breathe through your mouth. Doesn't help. It never helps. The scent hits like a wall. There's a vat of lime water frothing in the corner, animal hides piled up like some kind of furry graveyard, and flies already doing a victory dance. You'd think you'd get used to it. You don't. You check the work order hanging by a rusty nail. 10 cowhides today. 3 goats. A pigskin. 1. A horse? Huh. That's going to be a treat. Horsehide always comes in stiff and bloated, like it knows it's going to make your life harder. You tie a rag around your nose, mostly for psychological comfort, and walk over to the soaking barrels. The hides have been sitting there overnight, marinating like a very cursed stew. You reach in with your bare hands, because gloves cost money, and start hauling the dripping skins onto the prep table. They slap down with a wet splat, like meat slugs. This is the moment each morning where you question every life decision that led here. Maybe you could have been a miller, or a scribe, or literally anything that doesn't involve dead cow epidermis. But no, you're a tanner. The world needs leather. It just doesn't want to see how it's made. As you stretch the first hide out on the frame, your hands already ache. The cold makes your knuckles lock up, and your fingernails are black with grime that no amount of scrubbing can fix. You grab your scraper, a dull crescent of iron, and get to work. This isn't the glamorous part. There is no glamorous part. You drag the blade across the hide, peeling off layers of fat, hair, and membrane in slow, steady strokes. It's the kind of task that numbs your brain while punishing your wrists. Every now and then you flick something unidentifiable onto the floor, probably a tendon, possibly a curse. Historians agree that tanners were vital to medieval society. No leather, no shoes, no armor, no saddles. You were the backbone of transportation and warfare, and yet no one wants to sit next to you in church. Funny how that works. A fringe theory, mostly whispered by folks with too much time and not enough soap, claims that tanners developed a kind of immunity to disease. They're too gross for even the plague, they'd joke. Maybe there's something to it. After all, you haven't died yet. But then there's the debate. Some scholars argue that the worst part of being a tanner wasn't the smell or the labor, but the stigma. In a world obsessed with religious purity and spiritual cleanliness, touching carcasses all day made you untouchable in more ways than one. You were necessary, but never welcomed. A walking paradox wrapped in cowhide. As you work, the sun rises higher, casting a sickly light through the tannery's grimy windows. A rooster crows in the distance. You consider throwing a shoe at it. You don't have a shoe to spare. Halfway through the morning, you pause to stretch your back. A bad idea. It cracks like firewood, and now you're slightly more hunched than before. You sit on a wooden stool, try not to think about how many rodents have used it as a toilet, and sip from your water skin. Beer again, because you'd like to live to see 30. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks. Kids laugh. Life goes on around you, but in here, in your little pocket of damp misery, it's just you and the skins. And that's how it'll be, every day, until your hands give out, or your lungs do, or the lime vat takes you first. You exhale through your teeth and mutter the same thing you say every morning. Could be worse, and maybe it could, but it also could be better. You stare at the next hide. It stares back. Round 2 begins. You're about to enter what might be the least appetizing part of your day, which is saying something, considering you already started your morning scraping fat off animal skins with a metal blade. Now it's time to dip your feet into what tanners lovingly call the pit. You know, just your average neighborhood blend of stale urine and chalky lime water. Welcome to the sludge. You leave the scraping table behind, already reeking of old meat and bitterness, and make your way toward the soaking vats. These are not vats in the spa sense. There will be no cucumber water, no peaceful flute music, just a waist-high wooden tub filled with fluid that looks like it escaped from a nightmare. It smells worse than it looks, and it looks like soup made by a lunatic. The mixture inside is part urine, part lime, part water, part other. And yes, the urine is real, human urine, sourced from your lovely neighbors who gladly drop off their chamber pots for the cause. It's the only time they willingly contribute to your profession. You nod when they say hello. You try not to think about the fact that they peed in your paycheck. You step up to the vat and begin the process of stirring the hides. You do this barefoot because, again, boots are expensive, and also because soaking requires a good feel for the texture. That's what your boss told you the first time. You still think he just wanted to watch you suffer. The mixture is cold, but somehow burns. The lime eats into your skin like a slow insult, and within minutes your legs feel raw. You shuffle around in circles, pushing the hides beneath the surface with a long wooden pole. They resist. Of course they do. They always do. It's like wrestling damp, angry ghosts. This is where the real magic of leather making begins. The soaking process breaks down the hair and fat, loosens the fibers, and prepares the hide for scraping. But at what cost? Your skin cracks, your nails peel, your toes look like pickled raisins. But the job gets done, slowly, reluctantly, painfully. You pause to catch your breath. You lean on the edge of the vat and stare at your reflection in the sludge. Bad idea. Your face is pale, eyes sunken, hair matted with sweat and soot. There's something floating behind your reflection. Don't look at it too long. Historians often write about the hardships of peasant life, but even among peasants, tanners were a special breed. You didn't just toil in the dirt. You toiled in filth. You were the baseline of dignity, the unit of measurement for how bad things could be. There's a record from 14th century England describing tanners as the foulest men under God, which honestly feels like an undersell. And yet, tanning was essential. Without your work, knights would fight barefoot, merchants would walk in rags, and nobles would sit on splintery chairs. You were the invisible cornerstone of the economy, which is why, when you complained about your job, your master would lovingly remind you, "You're lucky to be useful," right before sending you back into the pit. Here's a fringe theory you probably haven't heard. Some medieval folk believed that the lime and urine mixture had healing properties. That's right, healing. There were whispered tales of tanners who lived longer than anyone else in the village, possibly because no bacteria dared touch them. It's likely just superstition, but you'd like to think that after all this, you'll at least get an extra year or two. Then again, some scholars argue the opposite. They point out the chronic skin diseases, respiratory infections, and the very real risk of lime burns turning into full-blown ulcers. There are even historical accounts of apprentices who lost toes. Not metaphorically, like the toes actually fell off, usually in winter, or during plague years. On Tuesdays, you keep stirring. The hides have started to bubble slightly. That's normal, sort of, you think. Probably. The air is thick with ammonia and lime dust, and you can feel it coating your lungs. You take shallow breaths through your mouth. It doesn't help. Nothing helps. A bird lands on the windowsill nearby and immediately flies off again. Even animals know to avoid this place. Eventually, you decide the soaking is done. For now, you heave the dripping hides out of the vat and lay them over the draining rack. They're heavier than they look. Slippery, too. One flops over and nearly takes your face with it. You stagger, nearly fall into the vat, then catch yourself at the last second. This is not a job for the weak, or the unlucky, or anyone with working nostrils, which is why turnover in the tanning industry is so high. That and the vat accidents. You've seen a man fall in before. Took 3 of you to pull him out. He coughed up lime water for a week, smelled like pickled ham for the rest of his life. You strip off your outer tunic, soaked and crusted now, and hang it on a hook. A little part of you dies each time you touch the hook. It's sticky. It's always sticky. No one knows why. You rinse your feet in a separate bucket of water, not that it does much, and rub them down with a rag that's seen better centuries. Then you limp over to the drying frame and begin arranging the hides, letting the morning air do what it can. They'll need to dry before the next stage. That gives you a brief moment of reprieve. Brief. Don't get excited. You plop onto a stool and pull a flask from your belt. It's homemade. You don't ask what's in it. Whatever it is, it burns on the way down and makes the smell fade for about 5 minutes. Glorious, glorious minutes. You glance across the workshop and see another apprentice vomiting behind a pile of wood shavings. Must be his first week. You remember your first week. You cried in a corner while pretending to adjust the ventilation slats. There were no slats, just a hole in the wall. A distant church bell rings. Maybe someone's getting married, maybe someone's being executed. Medieval bells are multi-purpose. You sigh and stretch your legs, which feel like cooked noodles with blisters. This life is repetitive, predictable. Every day is a loop of rot, scrape, soak, and regret. But strangely, there's a rhythm to it, a grim sort of stability. You're not rich, you're not respected, but you're not starving. Yet. Some days you dream of running away, joining a monastery, becoming a traveling minstrel, selling trinkets in a port town, but those dreams drift away with the stink. You are what you are, a tanner, a worker of skins, a footnote in someone else's history. You stand up again, bones popping, and begin cleaning the vat tools with a stiff, bristled brush and a generous helping of sawdust. Sawdust is your friend. It masks smells, absorbs gunk, and makes you feel slightly more in control of your world. Another hour, maybe 2. Then lunch, maybe bread, maybe soup, maybe silence. Then back to work. You try not to think about tomorrow, or the day after that. Just focus on not falling in the vat. Again, you'd think after soaking raw hides in lime and urine, the worst is over. You'd think that maybe, just maybe, you've paid your dues for the day, but no. That was just the prep work. Now it's time to get personal with those slippery, stinking, half-decomposed sheets of future leather. Welcome to the glorious scraping phase, also known as the part where your wrists cry. You make your way back to the beam table, a thick, rounded block of wood that's been chewed into submission by years of knife strokes. The hides you dragged from the sludge pit earlier are now waiting, flopped over the edge like wet, fleshy towels. The smell? Oh, it's evolved. Matured even, like a fine cheese that's been left in a hot barn. Aged hide has a unique scent. 1 part rot, 1 part ammonia, and 1 part existential despair. You grab your scraper, a curved blade with a wooden handle. It's worn down from use, like everything else in the tannery, and has the comforting familiarity of a weapon you'd use in a low-budget zombie apocalypse. You grip it tightly and pull your first hide into place. Then, you begin. Long, steady strokes. Dragging the blade toward you, peeling back layers of fat, hair, and connective tissue. The texture is somewhere between raw chicken skin and regret. You focus on the rhythm. Scrape, slather, flick. Scrape, slather, flick. Bits of gunk fly off the beam and land with soft thuds on the floor. You try not to think about how much of it is still technically edible if someone were desperate enough. Your hands ache almost immediately, not just from the repetitive motion, but from the angle. You have to bend slightly forward, keeping your elbows locked, using your body weight to apply pressure. After an hour, your back feels like it's being slowly disassembled by invisible gremlins. This is the part where time stops. There's no conversation, no bird song, no distraction, just the wet rasp of metal on meat. It's meditative in a way, awful meditation. Mindfulness, but everything smells like feet and dead things. Some tanners try singing while they work. You've tried it. It helps for a bit. But your voice always cracks, and someone inevitably yells from the other room to shut up. So now you just hum, low, tuneless, and vaguely menacing. One of the worst parts of scraping? The splashback. Oh yes, every so often your blade will catch a particularly springy piece of tissue and send a flake of something moist and unknown flying straight into your face, or your mouth, or, God forbid, your eye. You've developed a sixth sense for dodging it, but it still gets you sometimes. A little souvenir of your toil. Historically, tanners were exempt from certain taxes in some medieval towns. The logic? No one else wanted their job, so towns had to offer perks. It's unclear if tax breaks made up for the daily trauma of face grease shrapnel, but hey, less coin to the crown. Woohoo. There's a lesser-known tidbit about tanners that you always find weirdly fascinating. Some medieval folks believed that the smell of a tannery could cure epilepsy. That's right. There are actual records of people bringing loved ones into the workshop, hoping that the overwhelming stench would somehow shock the illness out of them. Spoiler alert, it did not, but it definitely made them vomit, so partial success? Meanwhile, scholars still debate the psychological toll of tanning. Was it the smell that broke people down over time, or the isolation? Some argue that being pushed to the edges of society, literally and figuratively, made tanners more prone to melancholia, or what they used to call humoral imbalance. Basically, medieval depression caused by dead cows and loneliness. You know, the usual. You pause to crack your knuckles. They sound like popcorn in a fireplace. Then you stretch your back. Bad idea. You hear something pop, and now you're slightly tilted. Great. Add that to the list. You continue scraping. You're halfway through the second hide, and the pile of refuse at your feet is starting to look like a meat salad. That's when a group of neighborhood kids walks by the open door. They stop. They stare. One of them gags dramatically. "Oi, Mr. Stinkpants!" one of them calls out, holding his nose and laughing. You raise an eyebrow and flick a particularly slimy chunk of tissue toward the doorway. It hits the ground near their feet with a satisfying splat. They scream and run, small victories. Sometimes you wonder if people like you ever fall in love. Not in a sad way, just curious. You've never seen a romantic ballad written about a tanner. No troubadour sings, "Oh, how I long for his leathered touch and ammonia musk." You suspect you're not exactly the dream of young maidens, more like the nightmare of laundresses. Still, there's something noble in the labor. The work is honest. You turn decay into durability. Without you, everything would fall apart. Literally. No belts, no shoes, no saddles or sheaths or scrolls. You are the quiet craftsman behind every knight's armor and every merchant's purse. You just also happen to smell like rotting fish guts. After hours of scraping, the hides are finally cleaned. Well, cleaned in the tanner's sense. They're no longer hairy or fatty, at least. You sling them over a beam to dry slightly before the next step. Your arms are trembling, your clothes are soaked. You look like you've been wrestling a swamp monster and lost. You glance at your hands, blistered, burned, discolored. The lime has started to bleach your skin in patches. You have scars on your knuckles from years of slips and nicks, and your fingernails. Well, let's just say they've seen better centuries. You take a moment to sit, not because you're lazy, but because your spine is staging a rebellion. You sip from your flask again. It tastes like moldy apples and regret. A true vintage. You think back to the tanners before you. Your father, maybe, or the old man who trained you. You remember how he used to whistle while he worked, even when his hands bled. He said, "The hides don't care if you're sad. Might as well whistle." You didn't get it then. You sort of do now. The afternoon sun cuts through the workshop window in hazy golden beams. Dust floats through the air like tiny spirits. You close your eyes for a moment and let the warmth wash over you. Just a moment. You can't afford more than that. Because next up is the slathering. That's right. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse, it's time to smear fermented dog poop into your fresh, clean hides. But that's tomorrow's problem. For now, you stand up slowly, stretch out your sore limbs, and limp toward the back of the shop to rinse your tools. You hum that same tuneless hum, the one that's become your anthem, your theme song, your survival chant. Scrape, slather, repeat. There's no way to sugarcoat this next part. Today, you'll be massaging fermented dog dung into animal hides. Yes, actual feces from actual dogs that you've collected on purpose. If you're still clinging to the last shreds of your dignity, you might want to let go now. It's about to get very medieval. You start by walking over to the dung barrels. They're tucked in the back corner of the yard under a crude wooden awning, as if a little shade will make them smell less like sin. The barrels are wide, open, and bubbling slightly, a telltale sign that the magic is ready. You take a breath, immediately regret it. The scent is thick, earthy, and deeply offensive to all five senses, possibly even a sixth. It doesn't just hit your nose, it invades your soul. The dung has been sitting for weeks, breaking down into a pulpy, semi-liquid goo. It's mixed with water and left to ferment in a very scientific process that scholars refer to as disgusting but effective. Dog feces, known charmingly in some trade records as pure, is prized for its natural enzymes. These help soften the hides, making them pliable and ready for shaping. You're not sure who discovered this, probably someone very desperate, possibly blind. You roll up your sleeves, not for neatness, just to avoid dunking your arms in the stew of shame. Then you reach into the barrel with a wide, flat paddle and scoop out a heaping, steaming mound of what can only be described as the worst smoothie ever created. It glops onto the hide like hot porridge from hell, and then the smearing begins. You spread it with your hands, no gloves, just skin to skin, like lotion. If lotion was made from the digestive nightmares of alley dogs. You rub it in deep, working the paste into every fold and fiber. The texture is gritty. The smell is personal. It clings to you, burrows into your pores. You'll smell it for days, weeks, years maybe. Some tanners use wooden paddles, but you're old school. You like to feel the hide, even if it means your fingers will never recover. Besides, this part is oddly important. The dung doesn't just soften the leather, it connects you to the material, makes you part of the process, or so the guildmaster says. He also once ate raw pigeon as a cure for gout. So maybe don't take everything he says too seriously. Historically, dung application was a specialized task, sometimes assigned to apprentices as punishment, or to the most experienced tanners as a mark of trust. Funny how that works. You're either too dumb to know better or too skilled to escape it. Either way, you end up elbow deep in poop. There's a bizarre fringe belief from certain 12th century texts that claims this stage of the process is spiritually purifying. Monks wrote about the humility required to work with filth, comparing it to religious penance. You're not convinced, but you do feel closer to death. Scholars still debate whether human feces was also used. Some documents suggest it was in times of scarcity. Others dismiss that as slander spread by rival guilds. Either way, you don't ask too many questions when the texture feels suspicious. You keep rubbing, hide after hide. The dung changes consistency as it sits, some of it thicker, some of it almost soupy. The newer stuff is the worst. It steams in the cold air, sending up a fog of regret. You pause to wipe sweat from your brow and nearly smear something brown across your forehead. Crisis narrowly avoided, and then, like clockwork, a townsperson walks by. She glares at you from across the road, holding a basket of clean laundry as if it's a shield. Her eyes say it all. Why are you like this? You shrug. She sniffs loudly, then marches away like you personally offended the concept of air. You get it. You smell. You always smell. But this is a whole new level. You could knock out a horse at 10 paces. Dogs bark at you now. Cats flee. Birds circle overhead, unsure whether you're prey or predator. You've achieved scent-based notoriety. Back in the shop, your fellow tanner lets out a wheeze and fans himself with a splintered board. You bringin' in fresh? He asks, eye-watering. Extra ripe. You reply, deadpan. He groans and disappears behind a stack of hides, mumbling something about quitting and becoming a shepherd. He says that every week. He's been here 12 years. You continue your work. After the dung is applied, each hide gets folded carefully and stacked in layers to rest. They'll sit like that for hours, sometimes overnight, absorbing all the microbial magic. It's weirdly intimate, this part of the process. You're not just working the leather, you're transforming it, softening what was rigid, turning rot into resilience. This is where the real artistry lies, the tactile sense, the patience, knowing just how much to apply, when to stop, how to fold the hide so it doesn't crease in the wrong places. It's not glamorous, but it is skill. People forget that. Historians agree that tanners were among the most technically skilled tradesmen of the medieval era. Their work required chemistry, strength, and endurance. They operated complex systems long before science gave them names. They knew how to balance lime acidity with soak time, how to judge weather patterns for drying, how to sense when a hide was overworked just by touch. You're not just rubbing poop on leather, you're conducting a symphony of stink. And the worst part? No one thanks you. When the local baron receives a beautiful leather saddle, he doesn't think, wow. Thank you to the man who smeared dog diarrhea on a cow's back to make this happen. He just rides away majestically, while you go back to scrubbing dung from under your fingernails with a sharp stick and some gravel. You pause to check the dung barrels, running low. Time to make another collection round. This is the part you hate most, the begging. You walk through the village with a slop bucket in each hand, calling out in your most polite voice, "Any pure for the tanner today? Fresh leavings for leather?" Most people ignore you, some mock you, a few actually contribute out of pity, habit, or a shared love of soft shoes. Once, a noblewoman handed you a perfectly clean chamber pot and said, "You poor thing," like she was gifting you an orphan. You thanked her, then dumped out the pot behind a tree, too clean. It made you nervous. By the time you return to the shop, the sun is beginning to slide down behind the rooftops. Long shadows stretch across the courtyard. The air gets colder. The hides have finished resting. It's time to rinse them. Again, you drag them one by one to the wash barrels, dunk them in fresh water, and scrub like your life depends on it, which honestly it might. Leaving too much residue will ruin the leather, or worse, make the stench permanent. You work until your arms shake, until your hands are blistered and pruned, until the last hide is hung up to dry, dripping clean. Well, cleanish. You collapse onto a bench, watching the evening light glint off rows of stretched leather. You did that. You survived another day, another round of scraping and smearing and soul-crushing humiliation. And you made something real. You take out your crust of bread, dip it in beer, chew in silence. Nearby, the apprentice vomits again. That's the third time this week. You consider giving him a pep talk, but honestly, he'll figure it out. Or he won't. Tomorrow you'll do it all over again. Dung, dogs, and the slow erosion of pride. But tonight you sit in the fading light, hands sore, chest full of strange satisfaction, and think, maybe I don't need dignity. I've got leather. It's early again, of course it is. You've barely had time to blink since yesterday. Your clothes haven't dried, your fingers still sting from lime exposure, and there's a faint, persistent ache in your lower back that feels like your spine is trying to retire early. But none of that matters now, because today you'll reacquaint yourself with your closest companions, your tools. You trudge across the damp floor toward the workbench, a splintered old slab of oak so worn down that your hands know every groove by heart. Laid across it in their usual unceremonious pile are the instruments of your peculiar art. A collection of blades, scrapers, paddles, beaters, tongs, frames, hammers, and brushes, each one crusted with some ancient residue you've long given up trying to identify. First there's the fleshing knife, wide, curved, heavy, a real brute of a tool, designed to shear fat and flesh from hides like you're carving a roast, but without the feast at the end. You give it a quick sharpening on the whetstone, not for precision, but because the last time you didn't, you nearly tore a hole through 3 days' worth of work. Lesson learned. Then there's the scudding tool, a dull-edged crescent blade with a short handle, perfect for scraping hair off softened hides after their urine lime spa day. It looks harmless. It isn't. You've nicked yourself more times than you can count with this thing. It doesn't slice clean. It catches, grabs, punishes. You eye it warily before setting it aside like it's an old frenemy. Next up, the staking beam, a low wooden frame with a thick hide stretched taut across the top. You use it to soften the leather post treatment, stretching and working it until it no longer feels like you're touching a cold slab of bacon. It's also where you threw your back out last winter during a particularly aggressive cowhide session. Good times. You glance at your beaming knife, a two-handled tool with a broad, dull blade used to deflesh the hide on the beam. You love it and hate it in equal measure. It's efficient, sure, but only if you use it just right. Too shallow and you leave tissue behind. Too deep and you shred the hide and your pride in one stroke. Historians agree that medieval tanners had some of the most specialized and brutal hand tools of any trade. They had to. Leather is unforgiving. It doesn't care if your hand is shaking or your shoulder's dislocated. If you mess up the process, there's no fixing it. You can't rehydrate a ruined hide. You just cry quietly and start again. There's a lesser-known tool that hangs on the wall, one you barely touch these days. A half-moon paring knife used for detail work like thinning delicate pieces of goat or kid leather, the kind that ends up on book covers or ladies' gloves. You used to enjoy that sort of precision. Now your hands shake too much. And don't forget the wooden paddles. They're not glamorous, they're not sharp, but they're indispensable. You use them for stirring soaking vats, flipping hides, and occasionally waving off overly curious rats. They're also good for a dramatic size when leaned on heavily. Then there are the frames and stretchers, long wooden contraptions with pegs and clamps, designed to hold hides in place while they dry and flatten. You've built half of them yourself, hammering crooked nails into warped boards and praying they hold up through a windy afternoon. The wind almost always wins. There's a ridiculous, mostly ceremonial pummel stone on your shelf, too. Some tanners use it to beat the hides into a buttery finish. You tried that once. Threw your shoulder out. Now it just collects dust and judgment. The tools don't just shape leather, they shape you. Your arms are thicker than they used to be. Your fingers permanently curled from gripping heavy handles. Your palms are calloused, blistered, cracked. If you slap someone, they'd think they were hit with a brick wrapped in sandpaper, which, to be fair, is sort of accurate. Here's a fun fringe theory. Some believe that the tools of a tanner were passed down through generations, not just for practicality, but for luck. That each knife carried the memory of every hide it ever touched, every mistake, every masterpiece. You find that kind of poetic nonsense oddly comforting, even if you know full well it's probably just because good iron was expensive. Scholars still debate how widespread tanning toolkits were standardized across medieval Europe. In some regions, the craft was passed down orally and through demonstration, with tools made by hand and shaped by local materials. In others, guilds enforced strict requirements. down to the length of your scudding blade and the angle of your paddles. You've mixed and matched whatever gets the job done without breaking your bones. The irony is these tools never really feel like they belong to you. You borrow them from the craft itself. They're not personal, they're functional, brutally so. They don't care how you feel today, they just need to scrape, cut, bend, beat, or stretch whatever's in front of them. A lot like the job itself. Midway through the morning, you slice your thumb open on the corner of the beaming knife. Again, you wrap it in a cloth that hasn't been cleaned since the last eclipse and suck the air through your teeth. You've stopped reacting dramatically to cuts. They're just punctuation marks on your shift now. You grab a hide from the stack and haul it over to the scraping beam. It flops down with a wet thump, speckling your tunic with droplets of yesterday's marinade. You plant your feet, grip the knife, and begin dragging it across the surface with practiced force. The blade sings against the hide, a soft, whispering rasp. It's oddly satisfying, until your shoulder cramps. You switch arms. Doesn't help. A neighbor stops by the door to the tannery and looks in. He's holding a sack of potatoes and wearing the expression of a man who just stepped in something he can't unstep in. You nod politely. He does not nod back, just wrinkles his nose and walks away, muttering something about God's punishment. And maybe he's not wrong. This work does feel like a penance, a daily confession. You confess with every bruise, every cut, every breath of ammonia. But what are you being forgiven for? Poverty? Smelling bad? Being born with a spine just sturdy enough to carry cow corpses? You shake off the thought and get back to work. There's always more to do. The afternoon drags on, each task blurring into the next. Tools clatter, water sloshes, flies gather. You swat one from your eye without flinching. That's how used to them you are. Sometimes you talk to your tools. Not because you think they're listening, but because no one else really does. You pat your fleshing knife and whisper, "Don't betray me today." You rub the grip of your paddle and say, "You're all I've got." It's not crazy if it helps you survive the day. Eventually, you begin cleaning. Tools get rinsed, blades oiled, brushes combed. Not because you're neat, but because if you don't, they'll rot, rust, and turn on you like angry pets. You hang them back on their pegs in a very specific order, not for aesthetics. There's nothing beautiful here, but for survival. If you reach for the wrong blade in the middle of a job, you'll lose a finger. You've come close, twice. As the sun sets and the tannery darkens, you run your fingers along the rack of tools and think, these are the only things in my life that haven't abandoned me, which is tragic and kind of sweet and very, very medieval. You extinguish the workshop lamp, shake the ache from your wrists, and limp home to your hovel. Tomorrow you'll return, and so will the tools. Waiting, always waiting. There's a moment, usually around midday, right when the sun hits the tannery roof just so, and the fermentation barrels begin to sweat, when you stop noticing the smell. Not because it's gone. Oh no, if anything, it's stronger than ever. But your brain, kind soul that it is, has simply gone into a kind of emergency shutdown. Olfactory override. Sensory surrender. That is, until you leave. Stepping out of the tannery is like waking up mid-punch. The sudden absence of smell actually makes your nose tingle, as though air is a new and hostile element. And that's when it hits you. You carry it with you, the scent. It's not the tannery that stinks, it's you. You are the mobile embodiment of ancient death and digestive rebellion, a human caution sign. You shuffle toward the village square, needing a few supplies, a hunk of bread, maybe some wax for your boots, and every head turns as you pass, not because you're famous, not because you're interesting, but because the breeze carried your ghost into town before you even rounded the corner. One woman clutches her apron to her nose and mutters something about that wretched man. A child points and asks his mother why the sky smells like eggs. A stray dog actually backs away from you. It's not personal, it's chemical. And this is the great, cruel truth of tanning. You never stop smelling like it. Not after a shift, not after a rinse in the river, not after scrubbing your hands raw with sand and vinegar and prayers. The stink isn't on you, it's in you. Historians describe it as persistent olfactory presence. The polite ones, anyway. Everyone else just calls it tanner's reek. You can wash your clothes, your tools, your bed. Doesn't matter. The smell lingers in your hair, your skin, your sweat. People say tanners are easy to find in the dark. Just sniff. There's a fringe theory you once overheard in a tavern. Some old apothecary claiming that a tanner's nose eventually dies. That after years of exposure to putrid substances, the olfactory nerve gives up the ghost and stops transmitting signals. "They're half dead in the face," he said, swirling his drink and looking proud of himself. "You're not sure that's true. You still smell everything. It just doesn't bother you anymore." "Well, until it does. Today, for instance, a new shipment of hides arrived. Horsehide. Not fresh. Possibly left out in the sun for a few days too long. Possibly cursed. The moment you cut the bindings and the rolled bundle fell open, the wave hit you like a plague wind. Even you gagged. That's when you knew it was serious. You staggered back, bumping into the scudding bench, eyes watering, stomach tightening. 1,000 dead things screamed at once. That horse had secrets, bad ones, and the worst part? You still had to work it. That's the cruelty of your profession. No matter how bad it smells, the job doesn't pause. You can't turn to your boss and say, "Hey, this corpse is a little too corpsey today." He'll just tell you to scrape harder, maybe plug your nose with wool, maybe breathe through your mouth and pretend you're somewhere nice, like a battlefield. And breathe through your mouth you do. That trick gets you through the worst of it, until the day you inhale at the wrong moment and taste something you can never describe without therapy. Some scholars argue that the tanner's reek served as an accidental benefit. It kept thieves and beggars away. No one wanted to rob someone who smelled like fermented regret. You could walk through the roughest parts of town unbothered, provided your scent got there first. There's even a recorded case of a tanner who survived a mugging because the would-be attacker fainted mid-theft. On the flip side, some towns had strict laws about where tanners could live and walk. You were expected to stay in your district, on your street, by your river. If you ventured too close to the market or, heaven forbid, the church, people would complain, officials would appear, fines would be issued. You remember the last time you tried attending a festival. You stood in the crowd, trying to blend in. You even wore your cleanest tunic, rinsed 3 times in vinegar and dried over lavender. Didn't help. Within minutes, a circle had cleared around you like you were a leper. A man handed you a radish and said, "For the love of all that's holy, stand downwind." You kept the radish. It was the only kind gesture all day. It's not that people hate you. Well, maybe some do, but mostly they hate what you remind them of. That behind every elegant glove or soldier's belt is someone like you, scraping gunk from a carcass while inhaling decay. You're the unwanted reminder that society is built on stink and sweat. You once courted a girl from the Cooper's family. She was kind, laughed at your jokes, even said you had earnest eyes. You thought maybe, just maybe, this could be something. Then she visited your workshop. It wasn't immediate. She smiled at first, said it wasn't so bad, tried to be polite. But then the smell caught her. You saw the exact moment it hit. Her face twitched, her eyes watered, and she asked to step outside. She didn't come back. Didn't speak to you again. You can't blame her. She married a baker, smells like bread now. You think back sometimes to when you were a boy, before the tannery, before the stink. You could smell flowers, fresh bread, rain, your mother's hair when she hugged you. It's different now. You know those smells exist, you just can't reach them through the fog that follows you. And it's not just you who suffers. Your home, your clothes, your bedding. They all absorb the odor. Your neighbors complain when the wind blows wrong. You once offered to patch the roof for the widow next door. She said she'd rather it leak. You tried lighting herbs in your room once. Rosemary, thyme, dried lavender. It smelled like a tanner's funeral. Didn't help. You bathe in the river almost daily, scrubbing with rough sand and old soap, hoping to scrape away the top layer of yourself. But no matter how raw your skin gets, the smell remains. Not just in your pores, in your memories. There's something deeply humiliating about being haunted by your own scent. It trails behind you like a shameful shadow. People wrinkle their noses and think you don't notice. You do. You just stopped caring out loud. There's a legend in your guild about a tanner who walked into the sea, not to die, but to rinse. He believed the salt would cleanse him once and for all. He spent 3 hours in the waves, came back pink, raw, glowing like a boiled beet, still smelled like death. You sometimes wonder if you'll smell like this after you're gone, if the grave will contain you, or if even the worms will complain. Still, there's a kind of pride in it. You're a marked man, not by scars or medals, but by scent. You walk through life branded by your labor, and no one can deny you've worked hard. Your nose may have surrendered, but you haven't. And when you lie in your straw bed at night, the stink curling around you like a blanket, you take a deep breath, not because you like it, but because it's yours. You earned it. You're a tanner. And your nose? Well, it'll never forget. Let's take a little stroll. Not through your workshop, your swampy lair of rot and regret, but through the town, or rather to the edge of it. Because that's where you live, where all the tanners live, not by accident, not by choice, by decree. You are, quite literally, not allowed in the good parts of town. Your cottage squats by the river, downwind from the bakery, the mill, the chapel, everything, really. It's not just inconvenient, it's deliberate. The town planners of yore gathered around a table and said, "Where can we put the humans who smell like pickled plague?" And voila, the Tanner's Quarter, permanent residents of the Outer Rim. Your district has its own street, its own corner of the market, if you can even call it that, and its own smell, which acts as a natural border. Unofficial signs mark the transition, wilting plants, turned up noses, and the slow dispersal of townsfolk as you approach. This wasn't just social cruelty, it was law. In many medieval cities, ordinances strictly regulated the placement of tanneries. In 1388, the English Parliament declared that tanning should be done at least 100 feet from any home or well. In practice, they just booted you to the fringe. You were environmental pollution before it was trendy. And let's talk about your water source. You use the river, but so does everyone else. The problem is you're downstream. So after the miller dumps his grain waste and the butcher washes blood from his cutting block, and someone's goat relieves itself midstream, then you get to fill your barrels. Lovely, refreshing. Some towns tried to keep tanners completely out of the gates. Historical records show instances where tanning was forced beyond the town walls, sometimes into the woods, like some kind of stinky exile. You tan hides in a shed next to wolves and bandits, while noblemen sipped wine behind guarded gates. Classy. Even inside the walls, you couldn't just go where you pleased. You couldn't live near the market square, lest you ruin commerce with your presence. You couldn't hang your hides near the chapel, lest the clergy accuse you of desecration by stench. And heaven help you if you wandered too close to a wedding. There's a memory you can't quite shake. Years ago, you tried to buy a small loaf from the main square. Just one. You had coins. You were clean. Relatively, but the baker saw you and stepped back like you'd pulled a sword. He didn't yell. He didn't throw anything. He just stared and said, "We sell to townsfolk," then turned away. It wasn't just rejection. It was annihilation, a reminder that no matter how long you worked, how essential your trade, you'd always be other, necessary, but unwelcome. Some people say it's your smell. Others say it's the nature of your work. Handling death, turning skin into use. But deep down, you suspect it's something older, something darker. The idea that people like you remind the town of the truth, that beneath every polished shoe and leather belt is blood, rot, and effort they don't want to think about. Fringe folk tales say tanners were cursed, that the gods marked your profession with odor as a punishment. One old man in a tavern claimed tanners were once royalty who offended a river spirit and were doomed to scrub hides for eternity. He also thought frogs were spies, so grain of salt. Scholars are divided. Some believe the spatial exclusion of tanners was purely pragmatic. The fumes, the waste, the runoff. None of it belonged near people. Others argue it was moral. That society needed outcasts to define its boundaries. You were the warning line. the visible limit of acceptability. And then there's the third group, the poets. They say tanners walk the line between civilization and nature, between life and death, and that society both needed and feared that. You'd roll your eyes, but one of them did buy you a beer once, so maybe they're not all bad. Your neighborhood reflects your status. Cracked stone paths, mud patches masquerading as gardens, homes built from leftover beams and hopes. The roofs leak, the doors sag. The only thing that doesn't rot is the iron will of its occupants. Yet there's a strange pride in this exile. You and your fellow tanners don't beg for entry. You've built a life on the outskirts. The butcher's kids play in your yard. The gong farmer's dog sleeps on your doorstep. There's community here, however foul. Your tools are stored beneath a tarp behind your house. Your hides dry on wooden racks staked into the ground, far from curious eyes. Children dare each other to run through the rows. Most make it halfway before fleeing. You smile and wave. Sometimes you offer to let them help. No one ever accepts. When festivals arrive, you don't attend the parade. You don't buy sweets or watch the dancers. Instead, you watch from a hill outside the gate, surrounded by the other banished trades. The executioner, the gravedigger, the rat catcher. A merry little band of people no one wants to talk to, but everyone relies on. The executioner always brings wine. The rat catcher tells the same 3 jokes. You listen, you laugh, you drink. And when the fireworks go off above the town square, you watch with quiet wonder, letting the colors reflect in the puddles near your boots. That night as you walk home, you pass the church. Not the fancy one in the middle of town, your church. The one out near the hill where the sheep graze, built from stone and patched thatch. It doesn't have stained glass. It doesn't echo with choirs. But it has a bench, a candle, a space for outcasts. You sit for a moment, breathing the cold, clean night air. It doesn't cleanse you. It doesn't change how the town sees you, but it reminds you, you exist, you endure. Back in your hut, you light a single tallow candle and remove your boots. The floor creaks, the walls lean. You place your tools in a neat row. A ritual, a rhythm, a way of saying, come, tomorrow I return, come because you will, even if they ban you from the square, even if they wrinkle their noses and cross the street, even if they pray you move away, you'll be here, on the edge, turning death into usefulness. One hide at a time, you sit at the edge of the well, alone, but not quite lonely. The stone is cool beneath you, the sky's a muted gray. Somewhere a bell tolls, midday maybe, or someone died, could be both. You've stopped trying to keep track of time by the bells. They all sound like reminders of things you're not invited to. Your hands are raw. You try not to touch your face. You learned that lesson last week when a bit of lime met your eyelid and turned you into a blinking mess for half a day. Now you sit quietly, letting your hands rest in your lap, looking out across the town square that you never really get to enter. That's okay, though. You have your people. They arrive one by one, each of them trailing their own brand of rejection. First is Hob the Gong Farmer, who greets you with a cheery nod and a smell that could compete with your own. He deals in human waste, hauling it from privies and dumping it in pits outside town. If you ever feel bad about your job, just remember Hob's fingers have seen things yours haven't. Then there's Elric, the butcher's assistant. His apron is permanently stained, and his humor is about as dark as a plague year sky. He's got a habit of whistling while skinning animals and telling stories that start with, "You ever seen a man lose a toe with a cleaver?" You have. It was his toe. Lastly, there's Marta. She's the executioner's daughter, carries herself like a knight, arms crossed, boots heavy. Her father swings the sword, but she cleans the blade. She once said, "We both deal with the end of things." You nodded. That was the day you started bringing an extra bread roll to share. This is your circle, the uninvited, the tolerated but avoided, the necessary nuisances of medieval society. No one carves statues for you. No one names streets after you, but without you, everything collapses. You're all pariahs in your own right, but together, you're almost normal. You talk, laugh, trade stories of the week's worst smells or best blisters. It's a game. Who had the foulest encounter? Who got cursed at by the fanciest noble? Elric always wins. Last week, a visiting lord called him a blood-splattered goblin with the manners of a pig. Elric bowed in response. Thank you, my liege. Historians rarely wrote about your kind. The tanners, gong farmers, rat catchers, lepers, beggars. You were background, scenery, the smell that didn't make it into the parchment. But you existed. You shaped the town. You kept it functioning. You kept it human. There's an odd power in being the outcast. You see things others don't. Hear what they whisper when they think no one's listening. Secrets spill easier when you're invisible. You know who's cheating on whom, who's smuggling grain, who's afraid of rats but pretends otherwise. You don't use this knowledge. You just keep it, like a pocket full of coins no one knows you have. Some scholars now argue that this lower stratum of society, the so-called untouchables, formed a kind of subculture, an alternate network of community. Where the town looked away, you looked inward. You shared, you joked, you helped each other bury dead things, both literal and metaphorical. There's a fringe theory that tanners, gong farmers, and other marginalized trades had secret festivals, celebrations of filth held at night beyond the city walls where wine flowed, songs were shouted instead of sung, and no one judged how badly you smelled. You're not sure if that's true, but it sounds nice. You've seen enough of society's hierarchy to know it's a fragile thing. The same people who scorn you in the streets wouldn't last an hour doing your job. The noble who turns up his nose at your presence? He rides a horse in a saddle you softened, wears gloves you helped create, and sleeps on a mattress whose leather casing you scraped clean. You once overheard a tailor say, "We clothe the lords in grace." You nearly laughed out loud. You clothe them in cured hide and calluses. The tailor just adds the fluff. Still, that doesn't earn you a place at the feast. When the town holds its spring festival, you and your group gather at the riverbank instead. You build a fire, share flatbread, hard cheese, cheap ale. Hob tells a new joke. Marta arm wrestles Elric and wins. You string up a hide across 2 branches and pretend it's a banner. Elric declares himself Duke of Dung. You knight him with a broomstick. He weeps with joy. It's the best festival you've ever had. Social life isn't about parties. It's about recognition, connection. Even if you're all outsiders, you see each other. That's more than you can say for the guild masters, the councilmen, or the preening apprentices who avoid eye contact whenever they pass. One time a monk from the abbey came down to the tannery, said he wanted leather for binding holy texts. He wore a thick wool cloak, pulled tight over his nose, and refused to step inside. "Leave it by the door," he said, tossing a coin toward the ground. You did as asked. The coin rolled into the mud. He left without saying thank you. You watched him go, wondering what it felt like to believe your soul was purer than your hands. Some say your kind are cursed. You say they're cowards. And then there's the matter of the tavern. Oh yes, the one tavern you're allowed in without someone pretending they forgot how to serve ale. It's in your district, naturally. The floor's uneven, the ceiling leaks, and the beer tastes like it was filtered through a boot. But it's yours. Inside, no one flinches. No one asks what that smell is. They know. They all know. You greet the brewer by name. He hands you your mug before you sit. Marta's in the corner, carving shapes into the table with her knife. Elric's passed out under a bench. Hobbs arguing with a goat. No one questions it. Here, you're not a pariah. You're a regular. And that means something. It's hard to explain to outsiders why this matters. Why a slanted table and a muddy stool mean more to you than a dozen golden invitations. But here, in this rough, smelly slice of the world, you are seen. Not feared, not ignored, not barely tolerated. Seen. That night, after too many mugs and too much laughter, you stumble home with sore ribs and a warm heart. The road is quiet, the moon is low, you smell like bile and beer and hide, same as always. But as you fall into your straw mattress, the laughter still echoes. You hear Hobbs' goat impression, Marta's terrible poem, Elric's snore-turned sneeze. You're an outcast, but you're not alone. And in a world that values perfume over purpose, maybe that's enough. You didn't ask to be involved in politics. You asked to be left alone to do your job, scraping, soaking, and surviving. But life has a way of dragging even the smelliest, least influential people into its grand dramas. And when you're a tanner in a medieval town, even you can become a pawn in someone's power game. It starts subtly, a change in guild rules here, a new tax there. Suddenly, your hide deliveries are delayed because the local noble wants more coin from the leather trade, or the guards stop you at the town gate, demanding a toll that didn't exist yesterday. You try to explain you're just hauling cow skins, not jewels. They shrug. Rules are rules. You thought tanning was apolitical. After all, no one likes you. You're not seen as a threat. You're the one folks cross the street to avoid, but somehow your labor, the literal blood and guts of your livelihood, has become valuable. And when things have value, people with power start to pay attention. The guilds are where it really gets complicated. You're technically part of one, the Tanners Guild. Sounds impressive, doesn't it? Like a brotherhood of noble craftsmen, all bound by shared honor and tradition. In reality, it's a loose collection of grumpy old men who argue about who has rights to which corner of the river and whose apprentice stole whose dog. But make no mistake, the guild wields power. They control pricing, access to materials, and who gets hired or blackballed. You once knew a man who refused to pay his guild dues. He vanished. Not literally. He just couldn't get work anymore. No hides, no clients, no coin. His name was whispered like a ghost. No one wanted to follow him into oblivion. So you pay your dues, not because you believe in the system, but because you believe in eating. Still, that doesn't protect you when the politics shift. There was a week last year when the bakers went on strike. Something about grain prices and mold regulations. Doesn't matter. What matters is the tanners were blamed for the stink near the grain warehouse. And suddenly, the magistrate declared that all tanning must be done an extra 30 paces from town. That's not just a minor inconvenience. That's days of rebuilding your vats, dragging frames into rocky ground, losing precious hours of work. You and the others protested, respectfully at first. A written petition, dictated of course since most of you are illiterate, was sent to the town council. It was ignored. Then came the shouting, then the march. That's right, a parade of pariahs through the center of town, chanting for the right to be disgusting in peace. You still remember the faces of the townsfolk that day, half horrified, half amused. Marta led the chant, swinging a tanner's paddle like a war club. Hob played a drum made from a stretched rabbit hide in a bucket. You, surprisingly, gave a speech. It wasn't eloquent, but it was honest. You said, "We may stink, but we matter." People laughed, then clapped. The magistrate didn't. You were fined 5 copper pieces. Marta was banned from the square for a week. Hob wasn't allowed near livestock for a month, which didn't make sense, but no one argued. Still, you made a dent. Some historians believe these kinds of worker uprisings, tiny, smelly, forgotten, were the seeds of larger labor movements, that even the lowliest trades knew their worth, that when pushed hard enough, even tanners could rise. Others argue it was just survival. No grand ideas, no vision of justice, just people trying to protect their turf and their livelihood from being erased by someone in a velvet hat who's never touched a dead goat. You tend to agree with the latter, but sometimes politics finds you for a reason. Like the time the Baron's son wanted leather armor. Something soft, flexible, but tough. He came to you despite the smell, the distance, and the warnings. Said he heard you were the best. You stared at him, this polished child of privilege with silk gloves and a feathered cap, and asked, "You sure you want to wear something I touched?" He said yes, so you made it. You worked for days, picked the finest hide, soaked it just right, scraped it smooth, treated it with oils, not dung, even perfumed it. Your one and only time using rosewater in the tannery. You nearly cried. When he wore it into battle, some petty skirmish you didn't understand, he returned unscathed. He came back smiling, said your leather saved his ribs, that he'd speak of you at court. You're still waiting for that part. But after that, things changed a little. The guards at the gate stopped sneering quite so much. A few nobles ordered saddles from you, quietly, through servants. No one praised you publicly, but work picked up. That's the closest you ever got to politics being on your side. And then there were the taxes. Oh, the taxes. One year, the council decided that since tanners contribute pollution, you'd be charged a river fee. You laughed, then stopped laughing when the collector showed up with a ledger and a guard. You tried to argue that your section of the river was already filled with bones, ashes, and at least 2 unidentified skulls. He wasn't impressed. You paid. Again. You started keeping coins under a floorboard. Not because you're rich. Hardly. But because each tax is invented out of boredom, and each one threatens to turn your month into famine. Marta once joked that if they taxed the smell coming off you, the kingdom could fund a new cathedral. It wasn't a joke. Eventually you started attending the back end of council meetings, not as a voice, just as a presence. You'd stand in the shadows, arms crossed, apron still wet from hide work, and stare at the men in robes who decided whether or not your home should be moved closer to the forest. They'd pretend not to see you, but they always spoke a little faster when you were there. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was fear you'd throw something. Either way, it was the only power you had. Presence. Some tanners left town entirely. Set up shops in unregulated areas, built communities from scratch. You heard one man started a leather commune in the hills, where everyone shared tools and nobody judged you for smelling like a battlefield. It sounded nice. But you stayed, not because you love it, not because you owe the town anything, but because someone has to remind them that every belt they wear, every book they read, every saddle they ride on comes from you, from your work, your hands, your stink. Politics has a way of sweeping over people like you, turning your trade into someone else's bargaining chip. But you endure, you scrape, you soak. You resist in your own way by showing up, day after day, reeking of value no one dares to name. Maybe one day someone will write about the tanners who protested, who stood at the edge of town and said, "We are here, we are foul, and we are not going away." But until then, you pay your dues, sharpen your blade, and keep your floorboard loose for the next tax that's surely coming. You ever see a noble glide through town in a full-length leather cloak, lined with fox fur and dyed a color that doesn't even occur in nature? They strut like fashion gods, like their robes were woven by angels and stitched by sunlight. But you know the truth. You know that cloak, like most things worn by the rich, is soaked in fluids you can't say aloud at dinner. Because fashion, dear listener, is filthy, and nearly all of it starts with you. That rich maroon tunic, that supple saddle, that sleek belt wrapped around the waist of the merchant's wife as she pretends not to notice you while passing through the market. All of it began right here. Your workshop, your hands, your stench. It's almost poetic. Almost. But mostly it's tragic. You stand under the drying racks now, looking up at strips of leather fluttering in the breeze. Sunlight catches the surface. Some pieces are smooth, glossy, almost golden. Others are rougher, thicker, built for armor or reins. All of them were once carcasses, and you made them wearable. Nobody talks about the fact that behind every knight shining armor is a layer of your tanned hide. Literally. Those straps and linings that hold the metal in place, leather. Those grips on swords, leather. Those intricate boots worn by royals, you guessed it. And you, the master of this transformation, can't even walk into a public hall without causing a stir in someone's sinuses. Historians often write in awe about the fashion of the medieval courts, how King so-and-so's doublet matched the hue of his heraldic crest, how Queen What's-Her-Name wore gloves so soft they could silence a goose. What they fail to mention is that you handled the part that used to moot, rot, and stink. And let's not even start on parchment. That beautiful, illuminated manuscript the monk is weeping over, praising God for the quality of its pages. You prepped that skin, probably scraped it with your scudding knife while swatting flies and muttering about rent. That manuscript might preserve sacred text, but it smells faintly of liver and desperation. There's a fringe theory floating in some academic circles, yes, even tanners have scholars now, that claims some of the dyes used in high-end medieval fashion required hide to be pre-treated in very specific ways, involving things like stale ale, fermented berries, and the bile of very specific animals. You can't confirm that, but you do remember the one time you tried to soften a goat hide using old wine. It came out a beautiful burgundy, and then disintegrated. Art is pain. Scholars argue endlessly about whether tanners were artists or laborers. The guild says you're a tradesman. The nobles say you're a nuisance. But every once in a while, someone commissions something special, a colored piece, a pattern pressed into a belt. And in that moment, when your work is not just functional, but admired, you start to think, maybe they're wrong. Of course, no one wants to watch leather being made. They just want to show it off. That's why the tanner's district sits downhill, so the runoff doesn't flow into the wine cellars, out of sight, out of stench. You once overheard a noble praising his new boots, saying the leather was soft as prayer. You nearly choked. Those were your boots. You remember that hide. It took you 3 days to get the smell out. You tried rubbing it with herbs. You even buried it overnight in ash. When you handed it to the cobbler, you half expected it to get rejected. But no. Turns out the rich like their leather slightly tragic. Some apprentices dream of moving up, of becoming cordwainers or saddlers, those lucky folks who get to work with finished leather. They cut, they stitch, they decorate. They get compliments. You get calluses, blisters, skin that permanently smells like a barn on fire. Yet you are the foundation. Without you, there's no material to shape. No straps for armor, no soles for shoes, no handles for weapons, no belts for pants. Fashion falls down without you. Literally, there's a particular memory that haunts you. Years ago, a traveling merchant from the coast brought a bolt of silk into town. Everyone fawned over it like it was the second coming. The colors were radiant, the texture heavenly. He sold it to the mayor's wife for a small fortune. Meanwhile, your leather sat folded at the market stall. Untouched. It was sturdy, it was strong, it would last decades. But silk is pretty, leather is honest. You started working patterns into your pieces after that. Little flourishes, a border here, a stamped motif there. You didn't expect anyone to notice. But someone did. A tailor, young, curious, and surprisingly not repulsed by your presence. He offered to trade a swatch of your patterned leather for a strip of dyed linen. You still have that linen. It smells like lavender and possibility. But here's the part they never write down in history. Sometimes the nobles do know where their fashion comes from. They just don't want to admit it. You once had a viscount slip through your alleyway at dawn, hood up, looking sheepish. He wanted a set of gloves, custom, soft, curved, just so. He said, "Discretion is appreciated." You said nothing, just nodded and got to work. You delivered them a week later, wrapped in wool cloth and sealed with wax. He tipped you double, never spoke to you again, but you saw him wearing them at a banquet. You could spot your work from 50 paces, the stitching, the way the leather bent just right at the knuckle, your gloves, on his hands, holding a goblet you could never afford. You felt pride, then shame for feeling pride, then pride again. The truth is you're part of everything. You are the invisible skeleton beneath medieval elegance, the bones of fashion. No one thanks you, but no one can avoid you either. Even in death, your work remains. The tomb of the late Duke, his body's wrapped in fine linen and a leather shroud. For preservation, they said, because leather endures. So do you. Sometimes you imagine what it would be like if people wore your leather and actually knew what it took to make it. If every glove came with a little note, scraped at dawn, soaked in lime, softened with sweat and sacrifice. But that's not how the world works. They don't want to see the dirt under the shine, the flesh behind the fashion. They want polish. You provide the platform and they take the credit, and you let them. Because deep down you know what they don't. That your hands shape their lives, whether they acknowledge it or not. That night, as you finish stretching a newly dyed piece of hide, deep green, almost emerald, you hold it up to the fading light. It's beautiful. You almost don't recognize it as something you dragged from a pile of rot. You wonder who'll wear it. A lady? A knight? Someone pretending to be important? Whoever it is, they'll never know it came from you. But you will. There are stains on your hands that no scrubbing can lift. Not the kind you see immediately. Those wash off with a bit of ash and elbow grease. No, these stains are deeper beneath the skin. The kind that settle into the creases of your knuckles and the folds of your palms like unwanted tattoos. They're not just color, they're history. It starts with the lime. Harsh, white, chalky. It sneaks into your skin when you're not looking. Dries it out like old bread, then cracks it open in fine, stinging lines. You'd think gloves would help, but who can afford gloves when you're already working to make someone else's? So you push through day after day until your hands look like someone's been peeling them layer by layer. Then comes the blood. Animal blood mostly, sometimes your own. A cut from the scraper, a nick from the beaming knife, or just the usual occupational hazard of dragging cowhide across nails and splinters. You bleed, you sweat, you rinse your hands in a barrel already stained crimson. Eventually, everything blends together into a strange brownish hue you just start calling tanner's tone. You used to have smooth hands. Once, back when you were young, back when you thought this was a temporary job, something to get you through a rough patch. You go home at night and stare at your fingers, flexing them, imagining them holding a quill, a mug, maybe even someone else's hand. Now, your fingers look like old rope, scarred, twisted, useful only for labor. There's a fringe belief among the older tanners that the skin remembers, that every hide you touch leaves some trace behind. Not metaphorically, literally. That something in the oils, the residue, the essence of the beast imprints itself on you, makes you more beast than man. You used to scoff at that. Now you're not so sure. You remember the day you realized your fingernails had changed, yellowed, thickened, edged with a strange gray line. No infection, no pain, just altered, permanently, a mark of your trade. Like rings on a tree, each one telling a year of hardship. Historians rarely talk about the toll this work takes on the body. They'll mention the smell, maybe the skin diseases, but they don't describe the strange ways your joints begin to seize up, how your knees start clicking with every step, or how your shoulders develop a constant ache, like a whisper reminding you that you've bent over the beam one too many times. Some scholars argue that tanners had shorter lifespans, not just because of the physical toll, but because of the toxins. The fumes from lime, the particles from hair and fat, the sheer daily exposure to decay. You breathe it in day after day, and eventually your lungs decide they've had enough. You've heard of old tanners coughing up black phlegm. You've seen one pass out from fumes on a summer afternoon. You try to stay strong, but you feel it in your bones. And it's not just your hands and lungs. Your back is ruined. Your knees... Forget it. You can barely crouch anymore without something popping. You used to move quickly. Now you move deliberately, slowly, like every motion needs approval from the committee of pain. You've started limping on your left side, not because of an injury, just accumulated wear, as if the ground itself is trying to pull you down one step at a time. One day, while helping a younger apprentice with a hide, you notice him staring at your arm. "What happened to your skin?" he asks, eyes wide. You look down, it's discolored, splotchy. You hadn't even noticed. Just another stain, another patch that won't go back to normal. You shrug. The hide bites back. He laughs nervously. You don't. It's not just physical. It gets in your head, too. There are nights you dream of scraping. You close your eyes and you're at the beam, pulling the knife, watching the fat curl up like parchment. You wake up sore, arms twitching. Once you even reached for a non-existent hide in your sleep and knocked a candle off the table. The stains follow you into your thoughts, into your speech. You once described a pie crust as hide thin. No one laughed. And then there's the smell. Still, always, you don't notice it most days, but every now and then, you catch a whiff of something. Lavender, pine, baked bread, and it stabs you. Not because it smells good, but because it doesn't smell like you. It reminds you of what clean used to feel like. You wash, of course, sometimes with lye, sometimes with ash. You soak your hands in vinegar, you scrub with sand, you boil water and steam your face. Nothing works. The stains have become part of you. A fringe story circulates in your district about a tanner who peeled his hands raw to try and rid himself of the stink. Said he wanted to feel like a man again. Last anyone heard, he was working in a monastery garden, wearing gloves year-round, praying for forgiveness from the cows. You don't pray, not anymore, but you do wonder, if you'd chosen a different path, blacksmith, baker, shepherd, would your body be whole? Would your hands still feel like your own? Or were you always meant to be this? A creature of labor, a walking scar, a man made of muscle and memory, wrapped in skin that doesn't quite feel like his anymore. You walk past a mirror in the tavern once and do a double take, not because you look odd, but because you don't recognize yourself. The man in the reflection has hollow cheeks, weathered eyes, hands that look twice his age. You stare for a long time, then look away. There's work to be done. The truth is, the stains don't just mark you, they define you. People know what you are before you speak. Before you move, you are a tanner. It's not just a job, it's a second skin. And despite everything, the pain, the stink, the shame, you keep going. Because even if no one thanks you, even if no one wants to stand next to you, even if the kids point and the ladies turn their head, you are necessary. The world runs on leather, and leather runs through you. So you rise, you scrape, you slather, you stain. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again, because the stains don't go away, and neither do you. Religion, in theory, is about purity. Clean hands, clean hearts, clean thoughts. In practice, religion needs leather just like everyone else. But that doesn't mean it welcomes the people who make it. You're reminded of this contradiction every time you walk past the church, not the grand cathedral in the center of town. You wouldn't be allowed within 10 yards of that place without a priest fainting from the scent. But the modest stone chapel near the river, the one where the benches wobble and the windows fog with damp, it's the only house of worship that tolerates your presence. And even then, barely. You remember your first time walking through its doors? You were careful, washed your face, changed into your least offensive tunic, even tried rubbing wild mint behind your ears like the apothecary's wife once recommended. You stood near the back, quiet, respectful, still as a statue. But still people noticed. A woman in the front row turned around, frowned, whispered something to her husband. The priest paused mid-sentence. His eyes scanned the room, then landed on you. His nostrils twitched. You could almost hear the mental math. Is the smell coming from that man? Should I mention it? Will God? He didn't say anything, but after the service, a young acolyte kindly informed you that perhaps the side entrance would be a better fit next time. Still, you went back, week after week, because even if the people inside didn't want you there, the building didn't seem to mind. Stone doesn't flinch, and besides, despite all the piety and pearl clutching, the church uses your work heavily. You supply leather for Bibles, for bindings, for belts and sandals, for scroll cases, for the parchment they inscribe with Latin prayers about mercy and grace. Sometimes you wonder if they ever consider the irony that the very word of God is wrapped in the skin of something dead, softened by dung, and scraped by someone they won't make eye contact with. Historians point out that monasteries were some of the largest clients of tanners during the medieval period. Their scriptoria needed parchment, fine, smooth, carefully treated hides. Monks would take weeks, sometimes months, to copy holy texts onto these sheets. Illuminated letters, gold ink, divine poetry, all resting comfortably on a page that, a few weeks earlier, you were scraping hair and muscle off with a dull blade. There's a fringe belief, held by some heretical groups, no doubt, that tanners are unknowingly co-authors of the sacred, that by preparing the parchment, you're part of the spiritual transmission. You've never told anyone this, but part of you clings to that idea. It feels like a small rebellion, like a whispered secret, and yet your hands are still considered unclean. Some towns even barred tanners from taking communion, a fact that stung more than you expected. When your cousin died, you attended the funeral mass and stayed in the back as usual. When it came time for the offering of bread and wine, you stepped forward. The priest hesitated, chalice in hand. He didn't speak, just glanced down at your hands. then past you. You stepped back. Quietly, no argument, no scene. It wasn't worth it. That night you drank alone by the river, cheap ale, bitter thoughts. You stared at your hands, the ones they refused to bless, and wondered what, exactly, was so impure about work. Some scholars argue the church's rejection of trades like tanning was rooted more in optics than theology. The scent, the association with death, the physicality, it clashed with the ideal of sacredness. The church loved the product, but not the process. Sound familiar? But then, there were moments, small ones, that made you question even your bitterness. Like the time Brother Alric came to your shop. He was old, frail, with a voice that sounded like it had been left in the sun too long. He needed parchment. Not for scripture, he said, but for music. Hymns, he whispered, eyes lit with childlike glee. For the children to learn. You offered your best calfskin, software even, cream-colored like fresh milk. He took it in shaking hands and thanked you, really thanked you, called your work an unseen act of grace. You stood there stunned. You didn't even charge him. A few weeks later, you passed by the chapel and heard singing. High, sweet voices, children's voices. You stopped outside the door and leaned close, your shadow stretching long against the stones. They were reading your parchment, singing from it, praising God with words carved into a page you made. You stayed there until the last note faded. That memory carries you through the colder seasons, when business slows, when no one looks you in the eye, when a priest refuses to bless your home because he doesn't wish to catch something. You light your own candle, say your own prayer. You once joked to Marta that you believe in a leather god, one who smells like ash and lye, one who knows the value of ruined hands. She laughed, said she hoped he wore boots. The religious hypocrisy isn't lost on you. You watch the clergy ride past in saddles you softened, holding books you helped prepare, preaching sermons about humility while refusing to touch the humble. You do not resent the faith, just the theater. You've read pieces of scripture in passing, bits of parchment left behind by scribes, or sung aloud at services where you hovered by the door. One verse always sticks with you. The last shall be first, and the first shall be last. You like that one. You wonder if it applies to tanners. There's another story, probably apocryphal, about a saint who once worked as a tanner before finding his calling. Legend says he cleaned hides by day and healed people by night. Some say he smelled so bad people avoided him until he touched them, and then they wept. You don't remember his name, but you think about him often. You wonder if he ever had to deal with guild taxes. Religion, like leather, is full of contradictions. It binds people together, even as it separates them. It preserves what's precious, but only through painful processes. It elevates symbols and forgets the hands that made them. And yet you keep making. Because even if you're banned from the nave, even if your hands never receive the sacrament, your work carries the word. Quite literally, and maybe, just maybe, that's enough. That night, you pass by the chapel once more. A breeze stirs. Candlelight flickers behind stained glass. You don't go in, you simply stand outside, eyes closed, listening. If you strain, you can still hear faint voices singing from your page. And you smile, because sometimes grace smells like old hide and ash. You wake up with a tickle in your throat, just a little one. Could be the damp air, could be the fact that you fell asleep still wearing your apron again. Could also be something worse, because it's happening again. You can feel it in the town's mood. The bells ring differently, the way people whisper in the market, the sudden appearance of charcoal marks on doors, the smell of smoke, not from the tannery for once, but from cleansing fires, purification rituals, incense, herbs, chants. The plague is back. You've lived through 2 already. The first was terrifying, the second exhausting. Now, during this 3rd wave, you mostly feel numb. It's hard to panic when death is just a regular on your street. But you do worry, not for yourself. No one really fears for themselves anymore, but for the people who still laugh at your jokes, the ones who leave bread outside your door. You check your reflection in a cracked, foggy shard of mirror, skin pale, eyes sunken, nothing new. The tickle remains. You ignore it. There's hide to soak. Ironically, being a tanner might be what's kept you alive. That's the running joke among your kind. We smell so bad, even the plague avoids us. You laugh when people say it, but the statistics are strange. Fewer tanners died during the last outbreak, fewer gong farmers, fewer grave diggers, all the folks who spend their days hip-deep in filth and death. They tend to keep living. Some scholars claim it's because you've developed stronger immune systems from constant exposure. Others argue your isolation keeps you safer. You don't socialize, don't crowd into chapels or halls, don't linger in marketplaces unless absolutely necessary. One fringe theory, hilariously enough, posits that the chemical stew you stand in daily, the lime, the ash, the fermented urine, actually kills pathogens before they can infect you. Whatever the reason, you're still here, and people are starting to notice. The same baker who refused you service 2 winters ago now sends his son to ask for gloves. Just to protect the hands, he says, when handling grain. You nod, say nothing, take the coin. The boy doesn't look you in the eye. Even the priests are showing up, quietly, asking if you have scraps of cured hide they can wrap around incense bundles. For the sick, they say, the smell keeps the bad air away. You hand it over without a word, because you know how this goes. Every plague year is the same: fear, blame, desperation, and always, always they look to you last. You've never been anyone's first choice, but in times like these, you become necessary. You're the last door before the grave, the one who never flinched from rot or bile. And so they come, whispering, avoiding your gaze, but coming all the same. You've had neighbors apologize to you, not directly, not with words, but in their posture. The way they leave food outside your gate, the way they don't scoff when you walk past anymore. Fear is the great equalizer, and right now everyone fears everything, except you, because you're already neck deep in it. The apprentice, Thomas, is scared. He won't say it aloud, but you can see it in how his hands tremble on the beam, how he winces when someone coughs. He's a good kid. Barely 16, still has hope behind his eyes. You try to keep him busy. Hide work is good for that. Soaking, scraping, stretching, it keeps the mind from spiraling. You show him how to use the beaming knife more gently, how to fold the hide just so before oiling it. You even let him take longer breaks, not out of generosity, but because if this thing gets him, it'll take more than hide to bring him back. You've lost apprentices before. One was named Callan, bright, fast hands, better than you at scudding after just 3 months. Caught the pox in spring, died in days. You still have the pouch he made from pigskin scraps. You keep herbs in it, smells like him, a little. Plague is a quiet thief. It doesn't announce itself with screams or fire. It starts with a sniffle, a cough, a fatigue that lingers. Then the sores, the swelling, the fever, the prayers, and then silence. The town prepares in its usual pitiful way. Doors locked, trades halted, people flee if they can. The rich escape to manors, the poor huddle in corners and burn dried rosemary. You stay put, because where would you go? You live with rot already. Your tools are stained with it, your skin too. If the plague wants you, it'll find you. But until then, there are hides that need finishing. Still, things shift. The tannery quiets. Orders drop off. People don't want to touch anything unless absolutely necessary. That includes leather. You adapt. Start making masks, not the fancy kind, just strips of hide shaped to cover mouth and nose, padded with wool, tied with string. They do little, but people feel better wearing them. You trade them for food, ale, even stories. One old woman gives you a silver ring in exchange for 4. They say the smell of leather drives away bad spirits, she mutters. You don't argue. A priest dies, then a scribe, then 2 bakers. The council closes the gates. No one in, no one out. Thomas asks if he should go home. You say no, better to stay. You can keep him cleaner, safer, more hidden. And then, one day, you feel the fever. It creeps in slow. Not enough to panic. Just a warmth under your skin, a pounding in your head. You don't tell Thomas. He'd run. You work through it. Drag your aching limbs to the vat. Soak a hide, stretch it, wipe your brow. You cough into your sleeve and pray, whatever that means now. But it passes. 3 days later, you're still alive, and you feel stronger, like your body fought something and won. You don't celebrate, you just keep going. Because survival isn't a miracle in your world, it's a habit. More people die, more houses marked with ash, but your little workshop remains tucked behind the river, reeking of old death and stubborn life. And when the plague finally eases, when the bells return to their usual schedule and the markets open again, people walk past your tannery with something almost like respect. They don't say thank you, but they don't spit, and that's something. There's a fringe story you overheard once, told by a wandering healer. She claimed that tanners were immune because they had already made peace with death. They sleep beside bones. They dine with flies. The plague has nothing left to take from them. You like that. You don't believe it, but you like it, because it makes your survival feel like more than an accident. It makes it feel earned. That night, you sit beside your vat and watch the moon rise through the smoke-streaked sky. The air still carries a weight, but you breathe it anyway, because your lungs still work. Your hands still move, and the world still needs leather, even now, especially now. You don't get many visitors at the tannery. People generally avoid you like you're contagious, cursed, or carrying plague, which, to be fair, is sometimes true. So when a wide-eyed, skinny-legged boy showed up at your gate clutching a bundle of clothes and an expression like he just wandered into a battlefield, you knew instantly. This was your new apprentice. He didn't speak at first, just stood there blinking, knuckles white from gripping the cloth bundle. You could smell the soap on him, not your usual kind. This was good soap. Rich people soap. The kind that's made with actual herbs and not just leftover cooking grease. His clothes were plain but clean, and his boots had no holes yet. He might as well have shown up wearing a sign that said, "This boy has never suffered." You stared at him for a while. He stared back. You gave him the once-over, sniffed vaguely in his direction, and grunted, "You'll regret this." He nodded. His name, he said, was Micah, 14 years old, no family nearby, sent from a town 2 valleys over. His older brother was a cooper, his father gone. His mother said he needed a trade. Apparently no one warned her what tanning really involved. Day 1 was, in a word, a disaster. You started simple. Hauling hides, a basic task. Pick up the soaked skins, lay them flat, and don't throw up. Within 15 minutes, Micah had gagged twice and slipped in a puddle of his own panic. You helped him up. Gently, no scolding. He wiped lime water from his shirt and whispered, "It's okay. I just need to get used to it." You nodded and handed him a scraping blade. Big mistake. You showed him the technique. Pull across the hide, not with brute force, but steady pressure. He nodded again, dug the blade in like he was skinning a demon, tore the hide in 3 places before you could stop him. "Oops," he whispered. You took the blade back without comment and showed him again, slower this time. He watched your hands, fascinated. You forgot how strange this must look to someone new, gripping a cow's skin, carving away its memories, turning it into something new. You'd been doing this so long you barely noticed the rhythm anymore. For him, it was alien, magic, and terrifying. By midday, he'd gotten the hang of it. Sort of. His hands shook, his eyes watered from the smell. You gave him a crust of bread and a tin of water. He stared at both like they were foreign objects. "You don't eat much, do you?" you asked. He shook his head. "I used to." The second half of the day was worse. Time for the real initiation, dung treatment. You led him to the barrels with all the ceremony of a man introducing someone to their doom. "This," you said, "is where the soul leaves the body." He leaned over the edge, took one sniff, and recoiled violently. "Are you serious?" he asked, blinking back tears. You nodded. "But it's—" He didn't finish the sentence. He just stared at the bubbling mess and turned a new shade of green. "You don't have to use your hands today," you said kindly. "Paddle only." He looked grateful until he realized the paddle didn't help much. After 2 minutes of stirring, he dropped it into the vat and panicked trying to retrieve it without falling in. You fished it out for him. He looked like he might cry. You gave him a moment to collect himself and said, "You'll get used to it." He looked at you like that was the saddest sentence he'd ever heard. Later that afternoon, you let him rest. Not because he'd earned it, but because if you didn't, he'd collapse. He sat on an overturned bucket, breathing through his sleeve. "I didn't know it would be like this," he said softly. No one does, you replied. Why do you do it? You didn't answer right away. You sat beside him, looked out at the hanging hides fluttering in the breeze like grim laundry, the river in the distance glinting with ash and light, the long, crooked shadows of a hard day's work. Because someone has to, you said. It wasn't poetic, but it was true. That evening, Micah helped you rinse tools. He didn't complain, just dipped the blades in the barrel one by one, scrubbing with sawdust in his sleeve. He was quiet, thoughtful, changed. You watched him carefully. His hands were already chapped. He winced every time he bent his knees, but he didn't run. Most do. Historians rarely discuss the training of tanners. Too unpleasant. No one wants to read about a boy puking into a dung vat or sobbing quietly after his first flesh cut. But this is part of the story, too. Every master was once a Micah. Every hardened veteran started soft. There's a fringe belief that true tanners are chosen by the hides themselves, that some people just fit. The smell doesn't kill them. The work doesn't break them. Their bodies adapt. Their spirits harden. You've never believed that exactly, but it's true that some just stick. They become part of the workshop, like the beams or the buckets. Some scholars suggest that the apprentice-master relationship in trades, like tanning, was one of the earliest forms of social mentorship, a shared bond forged in grime and repetition. You wouldn't go that far, but it is a kind of intimacy. You see this kid more than you see anyone else. You'll teach him things he'll never forget, and some he'll never forgive you for. You remember your first day, how the master didn't speak for hours, how you cut your hand, how you wept that night quietly into your straw bed. You thought about quitting. You didn't, mostly because you had nowhere else to go. Neither does Micah. The next morning, he's waiting outside the gate before you are, hair damp, eyes red, hands trembling. You nod at him. He nods back. Wordlessly, you toss him a paddle. He catches it, doesn't smile. Just gets to work. And that's how you know he'll make it. Not because he's strong, not because he's talented, but because he came back. By noon, he's moving faster, smoother. The hides don't scare him as much. He still gags when you open the dung barrel, but only once. Progress, you let him scrape a calfskin solo. He only ruins a corner. You pretend not to notice. He looks proud. And as the sun sets, casting gold across the workshop floor, you feel something unexpected. Hope. Not for yourself. You're past that. But for the work. For the future of the trade. Because as long as someone keeps showing up, keeps holding the knife, hauling the hides, surviving the smell, then maybe, just maybe, this dirty, thankless craft has a future. And that future's name is Micah. It's funny how, with time, things you once feared become the very rhythms of your life. The scrape of the blade, the burn of lime on your skin, the hum of the workshop as day bleeds into night. All the things that once felt like torture, now they're just part of you. You don't fight them. You don't question them. You work. The years blur, faces change, apprentices grow into journeymen, journeymen into masters. You're not quite old yet, but you're not young either. The aches in your joints are louder now. The fatigue settles into your bones with a steady, insistent weight. You catch yourself limping in the mornings. You cough. Sometimes. You rub your eyes a little too often. Micah's no longer a wide-eyed, terrified boy. He's taller now, his hands steadier, his shoulders broader. He moves through the tannery with an ease you never had. And you realize with a little bitterness that he's better at this than you were at his age. It's a quiet victory, a subtle one. He's learned the craft, he's learned the scent, the routine, the art, but more importantly, he's learned the most important lesson of all, survival. He'll live with the smell, the pain, the unspoken rejection of society, and he'll keep working. Because there's nothing else to do. You watch him in the workshop, the way he bends over the hides, the steady rhythm of his hands. It's the same rhythm you've known for years. The same motion, the same sacrifices, the same small victories and inevitable defeats. You wonder briefly if this is how it's always been, if this is how it will always be, but there's a part of you that knows the answer. One day, Micah will walk into town with a leather-bound book under his arm, and the townsfolk will whisper that he learned his trade from the old tanner who made his hands into tools. They'll talk about you, though no one will mention your name. You'll be a footnote, a memory, a story told over mugs of ale, shared by people who've never touched a single hide. But that's enough. You'll have lived your life, quietly, smelly, but you'll have lived. It's a strange thing, this legacy. There's no monument to it. No statue in the center of town, no plaque on the wall of the guild hall. Your hands are your monument. Your work is your tribute. The leather you shape becomes part of the world. It becomes what people wear, sit on, use, and protect. But they'll never know where it came from, and that's okay. Because you don't need their acknowledgement. You don't need their thanks. You've always known what you've given, what you've made. The world that people see, the one full of bright silks and soft shoes, exists because of you and the thousands of others like you. You provided the foundation for their world, the very thing that holds them together, even if they don't know it. You think about your first day as an apprentice, how you stumbled into this world with hands that didn't know how to hold a knife, how the smell made you want to vomit, how you wanted to run away, and yet you didn't. You stayed. You fought through the pain, the discomfort, the endless hours. You kept going because you knew it was the only way to survive. Now you watch as Micah stands by the vats, dipping his hands into the lime water, scrubbing down hides with the same careful motions you've done for years. You see the faintest trace of a smile on his face. Not because he loves the work, but because he's learned what it means to be a part of something, to make something, to build something that lasts. The legacy isn't in the work itself. It's in the way it shapes you, the way it becomes part of your soul, your bones, your very being. It's in the simple, daily act of doing something that matters, even if no one notices, even if no one says thank you, even if no one ever knows the sacrifices you've made. Micah, with his strong hands and sharp eyes, will carry that legacy forward. He'll teach others. He'll train the next generation of tanners, and the next and the next. And when he's old, with worn hands and aching bones, he'll look at his apprentices and see them staring at him the way he once stared at you, the way you once stared at the master before you. It's a cycle that repeats itself over and over. The hides are scraped, the dung is slathered, the leather is shaped, and though the world outside changes, though it gets cleaner, shinier, fancier, this work remains the same, dirty, necessary, eternal. You've built something, not with stones or gold, but with your hands, with your sweat, with your sacrifices, and it will endure long after you're gone. It will live on in the leather, in the hides, in the stories told around tavern fires, in the people who wear the work of your hands and never know your name. There's a soft knock at the door of your workshop. You look up. It's Micah holding a bundle of fresh hides, ready to begin the day's work. He stands there waiting for your signal. You nod and he steps inside. The apprentice is no longer afraid. He's not perfect, but he's learning. And that's enough. For today, for tomorrow, for the next day. The cycle continues. The work continues. And you'll keep going. Not because you have to, but because you've learned, just like Micah, that there's no other way to live. There's no other way to be. You're a tanner. And that, in its own way, is everything.